knight f3, knight f6, c4, c5, knight c3, knight c6, g3, d5, c takes d5, knight takes d5, bishop g2, knight c7, castle kingside, e5, a3, rook b8, d3, bishop e7, bishop e3, castle kingside, rook c1, bishop d7, knight d2, knight d4, knight c4, f6, f4, e takes f4, bishop takes f4, knight d e6, bishop d2, b6, g4, bishop e8, bishop e1, b5, knight e3, bishop d6, knight c d5, knight takes d5, bishop takes d5, bishop f7, knight f5, bishop e5, queen d2, knight d4, bishop takes f7 check, rook takes f7, rook d1, knight takes f5, g takes f5, queen d4 check, bishop f2, queen g4 check, king h1, c4, queen c2, rook e8, d takes c4, queen h5, h4, queen g4, queen d3, b takes c4, queen e3, rook f e7, b3, bishop b2, e4, e5, bishop c4, knight f6, d3, c6, knight f3, d5, bishop b3, bishop b4 check, c3, bishop d6, bishop g5, d takes e4, d takes e4, h6, bishop h4, queen e7, knight b d2, knight b d7, bishop g3, bishop c7, castle kingside, knight h5, h3, knight takes g3, f takes g3, knight c5, bishop takes f7 check, king takes f7, knight takes e5 check, king g8, knight g6, queen g5, rook f8 check, king h7, knight takes h8, bishop g4, queen f1, knight d3, queen takes d3, rook takes f8, h takes g4, queen takes g4, knight f3, queen takes g3, e5 check, King takes h8. e6. Bishop b6 check. King h1. Queen g4. Queen d6. Rook d8. Queen e5. Rook d5. Queen b8 check. King h7. e7. Queen h5 check. Knight h2. Rook d1 check. Rook takes d1. Queen takes d1 check. Knight f1. Queen takes f1 check. King h2. Queen g1 check. Knight f3. Knight f6. c4. c5. Knight c3. Knight c6. g3. d5. C takes d5. Knight takes d5. Bishop g2. Knight c7. Castle kingside. e5. a3. Rook b8. d3. Bishop e7. Bishop e3. Castle kingside. Rook c1. Bishop d7. Knight d2. Knight d4. Knight c4. f6. f4. E takes f4. Bishop takes f4. Knight d e6. Bishop d2. b6. g4. Bishop e8. Bishop e1. b5. Knight e3. Bishop d6. Knight c d5. Knight takes d5. Bishop takes d5. Bishop f7. Knight f5. Bishop e5. Queen d2. Knight d4. Bishop takes f7 check. Rook takes f7. Rook d1. Knight takes f5. G takes f5. Queen d4 check. Bishop f2. Queen g4 check. King h1. c4. Queen c2. Rook e8. D takes c4. Queen h5. h4. Queen g4. Queen d3. B takes c4. Queen e3. Rook f e7. b3. Bishop b2. e5. Knight f3. Knight c6. Bishop e5. a6. Bishop a4. Knight f6. Castle kingside. Bishop e7. d3. b5. Bishop b3. Castle kingside. Knight c3. d6. a3. Knight a5. Bishop a2. Bishop e6. Bishop takes e6. F takes e6. b4. Knight c6. Bishop d2. d5. Rook e1. Queen d6. Knight A2. Knight D7. Queen E2. D4. Rook B1. Knight B6. Knight C1. Knight A4. Knight B3. Rook F7. Rook C1. Rook D8. Knight G5. Rook F6. Queen H5. H6. Knight F3. Rook F8. Rook F1. Rook F7. Rook E1. Bishop F8. H3. G6. Queen H4. Queen E7. Queen G3. Bishop G7. Knight A5. Knight takes A5. Knight takes E5. Knight B7. Knight takes G6. Queen D8. E5. Rook F5. F4. C5. Knight H4. Rook H5. Knight F3. King H7. Queen G4. Rook F5. Knight H4. King H8. Knight takes F5. Rook takes F5. Queen G6. Queen E7. G4. Rook F8. F5. Queen E8. Queen takes E8. Rook takes E8. F6. Bishop F8. F7. Rook E7. Rook F6. Knight B6. Bishop takes H6. Knight D7. Rook F1. C takes B4. A takes B4. Bishop takes H6. Rook takes H6 check. King G7. Rook H5. E4. C6. D4. D5. E5. Bishop F5. Knight F3. E6. Bishop E2. C5. Bishop E3. Queen B6. Knight C3. Knight C6. Castle kingside. Queen takes B2. Queen E1. C takes D4. Bishop takes D4. Knight takes D4. Knight takes D4. Bishop B4. Knight B5. Bishop A5. Rook B1. Queen takes C2. Rook C1. Queen B2. G4. Bishop G6. F4. Bishop E4. Rook F2. Knight H6. Bishop D3. Queen B4. Rook B1. Queen C5. Knight takes E4. D takes E4. Queen takes A5. Castle kingside. Bishop E2. E3. Rook F1. Rook C8. Queen E1. Queen d5. Rook b2. f6. Queen g3. F takes e5. F takes e5. Rook f8. Rook takes f8 check. Rook takes f8. Queen takes e3. Knight f7. Knight c3. d5. c4. c6. Knight f3. Knight f6. Knight b d2. Bishop f5. Knight h4. Bishop e4. f3. Bishop g6. e3. e6. g3. Bishop e7. a3. Knight b d7. C takes d5. C takes d5. Knight takes g6. H takes g6. Bishop d3. e5. Castle kingside. Castle kingside. Queen b3. Queen c8. Knight b1. E takes d4. E takes d4. Knight b8. Knight c3. Knight c6. Bishop e3. Queen d7. Rook a d1. Rook f d8. Rook f e1. Knight e8. Bishop f2. Knight c7. Bishop f1. Bishop f6. Queen a2. g5. b4. g6. Queen d2. King g7. b5. Knight e7. Bishop e3. Knight e6. Bishop h3. Knight f5. Bishop takes f5. G takes f5. f4. g4. Queen d3. Rook a c8. Rook c1. Rook c4. Knight e2. Knight c7. Knight c3. Rook c8. h3. G takes h3. King h2. Knight takes b5. Knight takes b5. Queen takes b5. King takes h3. Queen d7. King g2. b5. Rook b1. a6. Rook b c1. Queen e6. Bishop f2. Rook takes c1. Rook takes e6. F takes e6. g4. F takes g4. Queen e2. King f7. Queen d3. Rook 1 c2. Queen h7 check. King e8. f5. Bishop takes d4. Queen g6 check. King d8. Queen takes e6. Rook takes f2 check. King g3. Rook c3 check. King takes g4. Rook g2 check. King f4. Rook f2 check. King g4. King c7. Queen e7 check. King b6. Queen d8 check. Rook c7. Queen takes d5. Bishop c5. Queen d8. King b7. f6. Bishop takes a3. Queen d5 check. King b6. Queen d8. Bishop c5. Queen b8 check. Rook b7. Queen d8 check. King a7. Queen d5. Bishop b6. King g5. Rook c7. King g6. b4. Queen e6. Bishop d4.